Try that again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. My name is Amy Wilborn, and I am delighted to serve as your worship associate today. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies here. We welcome your mind, your heart, your spirit here. We welcome all you are bringing with you today, and all your heart longs to set down. We extend a special welcome to each guest among us. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you and drop it in the offering plate later in the service. Guests may also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary, where folks will also find hearing assist devices and Braille hymnals. A fragrance-free area is located on the front right side in the first few pews. If you are a visiting family, including children or youth, after the time for all ages, noted in your order of service, please join the children's recessional and head across the hall to the common room. There you will be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee and conversation and even treats today in the common room. Again, my name is Amy Wilborn, and you can come talk to me at the guest table there. As a way to engage in First Church, I invite everyone to explore the announcements insert for the numerous opportunities available here. In particular, let me draw your attention to a few. Join First Church members for Micah's annual meeting this Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Bayshore Lutheran Church. This inspiring, high-energy event is our yearly opportunity to stand with our inner city congregation partners and remind our political leaders that Milwaukee racial justice issues matter. For more information or to connect for the event, see Pete Knesny at First Coffee Hour or email him. The Chronologically Gifted Group's October Potluck is next Sunday, October 27th. As usual, please bring a dish to share and join us in Max Otto Hall at 12:30 p.m. after the second service. Miss Julie's Music for Fun for early childhood families. Parents, grandparents, nannies, aunts, uncles, bring your wee ones age 1 to 5 and explore music, rhythm, movement, finger plays, and songs with Julie Thompson from 10 to 10:45 a.m. on Thursdays in November and early December. Register early, either online or at the religious education table, so you can meet the minimum enrollment to launch this class. Please find details and more events in the announcement insert. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. Once again, I welcome you to First Church by inviting you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. I'd like to invite Pat up here to light our chalice.
Our opening words this morning are by Norman Fisher. To practice forbearance. To practice forbearance is to appreciate and celebrate the heart's vulnerability and to see that the slicing or the piercing of the heart does not require defense. That the heart's vulnerability is a good thing because wounds can make us more peaceful and more real, if, that is, we are willing to hang on to the leopard of our fear, the serpent of our grief, the boar of our shame, without running away or being hurled off. Forbearance is simply holding on steadfastly with whatever it is that unexpectedly arises. Not doing anything, not fixing anything, because doing and fixing can be a way to cover up the heart. to leap over the hurt and pain by occupying ourselves with schemes and plans to get rid of it. Just holding on for dear life, holding on with what comes is what makes life dear. Will you please rise? You may be seated. We have the true delight this morning of getting to celebrate the Reverend Dena MePhetres' 10 years of service to this congregation. So to be clear, Reverend Dena has actually served more than 10 years with this congregation since she began on August 1st of 2009. Before joining us, she had served for more than 10 years with the New Hampshire congregation, and before that she served for 2 years in Minnesota. So you all called Reverend Dena as your very first ever called associate minister in May of 2009, and your first ever settled female minister. Dena has been a stable ministerial presence with you through the transition, including serving as the bridge minister when your interim senior minister, the Reverend Elaine Parashula, departed 4 months early. And I am so grateful and so lucky to have you as my colleague, Dena. Reverend Dena has led our pastoral care program into the supportive and transformative witness of presence that it is today. Along with our lay leaders, Lori Peterson and Pete Newwald, Dena developed the current robust pastoral care associate training program. She has also supported the formation of the memorial service reception team and the shawl ministry. Reverend Dena recently revamped our small group ministry program with the creation of theme circles, and she's dramatically deepened our summer service experience, working to coach one-on-one our members on their summer sermons as well as delivering her own. Dena has also developed some of our most artistic and dearly loved worship services: the chanting service, the tenebrae service, the winter solstice service, the coming out day and pride day services. Working in social justice, Dena has supported leaders who started new action groups, from Common Ground to escalating inequality to immigration issues. Working with Nancy Pieski, Reverend Dena started the Share the Plate program, and working with Lisa Geis, Dena formed the 57K task force to give 10% of the McLaughlin bequest to social justice initiatives. And just last year, Reverend Dena created our first ever social justice intern position, hiring and supervising Claire Keys. Dena has been a transformative president. You're the president now, Dena. Apparently it is that easy. Dena has been a transformative presence in this community for more than 10 years. She's been witnessing you and supporting you, challenging you, and most of all, she's been loving you. We're very lucky that she's shared her ministry with us. Will Joanne Bishop and Lisa Knesny come up and share some member testimonials?
As you've heard, Dena's portfolio of responsibilities with committees and teams and groups at First Church is long and large. I have had the honor of working with Dena on her committee on ministry, as a pastoral care associate, and chairing the pulpit guest committee. In each of these encounters, she has modeled a presence and as an astute listener, something I still try to achieve. She's taught me that self-care is important in order to be able to serve others as her best self. Her sense of humor has shone through when levity was needed. When things get heavy in the work, she knows just the right thing to say to soften the moment. She recently shared with me that her tenure here has been the longest of anywhere she's been, but I'm not sure about that. We are blessed to have you with us, and I feel blessed to have known you and worked with you in all these capacities. We have a few testimonials from people that have worked with Dena closely, church leaders that they've shared with us, so I would like to tell those to you, Dena, and share them with your congregants. Paul Kozadowski. I worked with Dena on the Pulpit Guest Committee for 2 years and remember most her presence at the meetings. There were often contingency plans, last-minute changes and challenges to select and contact ministers for the church year. At these meetings, Dena's presence was a welcome combination of efficiency expert and Zen master. Her sense of calm resolve and good humor always made the work a pleasure. Lori Peterson. I've worked closely with Dena for over 6 years with the Pastoral Care Associates. She's an amazing and delightful person to work with, and I've learned so much from her. Dena's a wonderful role model for our PCAs as they go out and offer a quiet listening presence to our congregation during times of need and joy. She's so compassionate and not afraid to allow herself to be vulnerable in our circle. Her zany and easy sense of humor is powerful and keeps us all engaged. I'm delighted to be able to work with Dena for years to come. How blessed are we to have Dena with us on our journey. From Sharon Depew. I've had the unique opportunity to interact with Dena around a very sensitive area, death, and how we deal with deaths of our beloved members in our community. Dena has set a high standard for sensitive and loving recognition of the loss of our community, the very personal loss to friends and family, and to the natural progression from life to death for all of us. From Candace Haight. Dena's been a consistent resource and strong advocate in my journey to pursue my spiritual direction calling and share my spiritual practice. I've also had the opportunity to work with Dena on church matters. Her integrity, respect, and compassion, both for self and others, are guiding principles, and her laughter is contagious. She is a mentor and friend. We are blessed to have her for another 10 years. From Sally Lewis. It was near the end of our 2-year transition and search after Drew retired. I was on the board. When our transition minister unexpectedly left her job several months early, the board turned to Dena to cover the gap. At the board's request, Dena stepped up and took the responsibilities of the senior minister duties on top of her already full associate minister duties, and put out extraordinary effort to keep everything running smoothly. Her wonderful sense of humor helped carry her along. Sally says, I still remember the evening she reported to the board at the conclusion of her 4-month-long bridge minister. She began her report. At last, we've crossed the bridge. No one fell off the bridge, and no one jumped off the bridge. Liz Irwin, who was here, who was on her search committee, says, I chaired her search committee, the search committee that eventually brought Dena to our congregation. It's hard to believe we started this work 11 years ago. My first impressions of Dena included her warmth, her openness, her sense of humor, her clear communication in writing, in conversation, and from the pulpit. All of these impressions have been validated many times. I'm glad we chose Dena, and Dena chose us. So Dena, to mark this special time, the congregation has offered some gifts for you. So I ask you to come up and receive these gifts.
As long as it's not the presidency.
If we vote, it's so.
But you do so much better than Trump.
So we have a few new gifts this service. There was something presented to her at the 9 o'clock service offer also. I'm going to start with a certificate. I mentioned that Dena models self-care, and that's something that helps her be her best to be present to us. This is a certificate for a massage with your favorite therapist and someone she has been visiting for her whole time in Milwaukee. We also know that a few years ago, Dena shared with us that her favorite dessert is peach cobbler. And she told me this at a dessert auction for Mother's Day. So Becky Holman, one of our very talented members, has created a peach cobbler, gluten-free peach cobbler for Dena to take home and share with her friends and family. There are many treats that will be in the common room for you all to share, but this one is just for Dena. And then, so many of you had the chance over the last few weeks to sign this card that was in the common room. All of the well wishes on there, Dena, are heartfelt and genuine and express our love for you. If you did not have a chance to sign the card, you can come up here to the chancel after service. There'll be pens and you can add your name to that too. And then there was one more little gift that was given to Dena at the earlier service that we'll share with you now. She's already seen it, but Little Mouse told us that she is going to be doing some landscape changes at her home in Shorewood this coming summer. So we wanted something that would mark that time with us and that she could tuck into her special little corner of the earth.
It's a rock. Everybody needs a rock. Everybody.
It says, Reverend Dena, in gratitude for nurturing our spirit, 2009 to 2019. So thank you all for contributing to this.
So ministers, part of our work is to bless people, and so we give a lot of blessings and don't always have the opportunity to receive the blessings of our community in return. So we're going to do a laying on of hands ceremony for Dena right now, recognizing that ours is an embodied faith, that we bring the love of our hearts out into the world through the work of our hands, and we'll do this through a ritual blessing for Dena. So Dena, would you rise and face the congregation? At this point, I would invite all of the folks who are in the balcony to start to make your way downstairs so you can participate in the ceremony. Dena, this congregation would like to bless you as you have blessed us. We invite you to receive our blessing and to be held in trust by the touch of our hands. So first, I'd like to invite up to touch Dena on her shoulders or her arms, to stand behind her facing the congregation, the folks who have accompanied her most closely, the search committee, who originally chose Dena to be our candidate for associate minister, and any of the folks who have served on Dena's committee on ministry over the years. There are a lot of you, so you can touch someone who's touching Dena. And in our second circle, I'd like to invite up to touch someone's shoulder or arm who's touching someone who's touching Dena, team members in Dena's program areas over the years. So that's folks who have served in pastoral care as chalice circle facilitators or theme circle facilitators. Folks on the Social Justice Council, come on up. Folks on the pulpit guest team, the adult spiritual develop team, and folks on the staff team, come on up, Drew. And in our third circle of connection, I'd like to invite up everyone. So please rise in body or spirit and come join in the community blessing. Find someone's shoulder or arm, touch someone who's touching Dena. During this ritual, Dan Dance is going to be leading us in singing, "May I be filled with loving kindness." The lyrics to Filled with Loving Kindness are, "May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole." And the second verse is the same words, but we'll replace I with you. And in the third verse, we'll replace I with we. Dan? I'd like to invite you now into a time of contemplation, which will be followed by silence, followed by the seated singing of Spirit of Life. So just go ahead and find your breath. Spirit of life and love, Holy One of our being and our becoming, that which is sacred within, among, and beyond us. May we be held in vulnerability in this community. May we know it is okay to be human, imperfect, whole. May we know that we are worthy of love, connection, and belonging. And in knowing that, may we also give love, connection, and belonging to others. May it be so.
My life has been one long quest for belonging. It's something I've always struggled with. This quest took a harsh turn for me in the summer of 2018 when I entered the Aurora Dewey Treatment Center to detox from alcohol. None of my family or friends knew that I had a drinking problem, and only my sons and my one friend were told where I was going. Shame had been my hiding place. I was not at all prepared for what lay ahead of me in the hospital. My phone was immediately taken away, along with most of my belongings. I was strip searched and left alone in a sparsely furnished room, while people of all ages and walks of life were milling about in the hallways. Some looked like they had been ripped from a trauma. Others looked like they had lived there for months. I was cut off from the rest of the world, and I'd never felt so alone in my life. Thankfully, I'd brought my copy of the book, Life Without Pockets, written by my dear friend, Carla Ernst. The book was distinctly in her voice, sprinkled with her unique brand of humor. Her words comforted me, and it was like she was there with me. Shortly after finishing it, I gained the courage to enter the chaos outside my door and to begin my journey to recovery. I was in the hospital for 3 days, and after being released, I faced the real challenges of being sober. I was flooded with emotions. Paralyzed by this new tide, I struggled to face a conflict with a very close friend and instead avoided it. That friendship ended, and in a series of cascading events, I lost the support of an entire friend group. I was also no longer being invited to Wine Wednesdays, girls' weekends, and other drinking-centered activities. Even when I was, I lacked the desire to participate in them. I hit an emotional low and lost trust in people. I stumbled to find my footing in a sober life where the rest of the world celebrated alcohol. I wondered how I could possibly feel that I belonged without it. The one place I could be myself without feeling stigmatized was this church. I had always been an involved member, but I began to throw myself into everything that I could. Theme circle, Feast for Fun events, Geography of Grace, circle suppers, and I even served on a committee. It was through sharing pieces of my story in small groups and making myself vulnerable that I began to develop a true sense of belonging. In the safety of those small groups, I was slowly able to open up and allow new and renewed connections to grow. In hearing others share their pain, I also felt less alone. The faces that I became accustomed to seeing in coffee hour became fully developed souls who I felt connected to through our shared joy and suffering. Ironically, it turns out that the very thing I thought helped me to connect with others was the very thing that was preventing me from experiencing belonging. Alcohol was a mask I'd not been fully conscious I'd been wearing. On the day I was released from the hospital, I saw Carla walking down the street near her home. I swung my car around and picked her up. We sat in front of her apartment, where I shared my story with her, why I had been hospitalized, and what her book meant to me during my stay. I also told her something else. You see, when I got to the end of Carla's book and I read the acknowledgments, I found my name. It was evidence to me in that moment when I felt so alone that I belonged to at least one person. It moved me from isolation to connection. After Carla recovered from the shock of learning from my addiction, yes, Carla was actually rendered speechless for a moment. You know Carla. She asked me if it was okay if she told me she loved me, and I said yes, and told her I loved her too. Then we held each other, just as we all continue to hold each other here.
I had a classmate in seminary who was one of the most unhappy people I had ever met. She was extremely critical of everything, the structures of our courses, the content that we were learning, the people in class with her. She even hated the parking lot. Now, to be fair, the parking lot was very small and particularly challenging, but it was still difficult to be around this woman. In my final year of seminary, I took a leadership course that promised to make us deeper and more authentic leaders. It was kind of a strange setup. There were only 4 books on the syllabus, when most of grad school had required more reading than it was possible to do in a day. Most of the coursework was reflective listening in pairs or individual reflection in journals or group circles of witnessing one another. I thought it was odd, but I trusted the person who had organized the course, and the teacher impressed me, so I signed up. Unfortunately, my grumpy classmate also signed up. I was particularly annoyed because it seemed that this class was going to involve a lot of feelings, and I wouldn't be able to hide from her in an intellectual argument. The class was designed to encourage vulnerability, and I was nervous to expose my vulnerability to this woman's constant criticism, afraid to open my heart in tenderness around her anger and her judgment. When I ask our church members about the most powerful moment in their own history with this congregation, I consistently hear one of 3 stories. A social justice story, a weathering conflict in a healthy way story, or a story of being held in vulnerability. This third kind of story, the vulnerability story, is the one that brings people to tears. It's a story of the community showing up in illness or death or loss. It's a story of finally being able to be one's true self and then being welcomed in that authenticity. It's a story of being able to be loved, even in imperfection, failure, or suffering. Now, I've told you this before, and I will tell you again, you all are an impressive people. You work hard, you do your research, and then you show up and you do your best, and your best is very good. There are so many benefits to the level of excellence that you bring to this congregation, but there are downsides to that as well. Vulnerability is not always easy in a culture that reaches for perfection. In one of our congregation's small groups, a member shared her fear that she would not be accepted here at church if she didn't have everything in her life totally together. Could she show up if she was struggling? Could she go into coffee hour and admit that some of the things in her life were not going all that well? In grounded theory researcher Brené Brown's investigation into vulnerability and belonging, she interviewed hundreds of people and gathered 11,000 pieces of data about what it is that makes a person experience belonging. In her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, Brown found that she could divide people into 2 categories. People who had a deep sense of connection and belonging, and people who struggled to find connection and belonging. And she sifted through that 11,000 pieces of data for the primary difference between group 1 and group 2. And she found, I'm sorry to tell you folks, this is not good news. She found that the primary difference between group 1 that felt a sense of belonging and group 2 that struggled for it was that group 1 believed they were worthy of belonging, and group 2 struggled to believe they were worthy of belonging. Initially, Brown assumed that the first group just had easier lives, that they had had better childhoods or less suffering, more acceptance from parents and family and friends. But when she looked at that data, that was not the pattern she found. She found that the people who believed they were worthy and those who struggled to believe they were worthy had the same rates of trauma and divorce and alienation and oppression. The difference between the two lists was that the people who believed they were worthy had the courage to be imperfect. They were compassionate with themselves first and then with others. And they built connections from their own authenticity and vulnerability. The people on the list who struggled with worthiness tended to numb their feelings of vulnerability. They pushed themselves to be perfect. They had high levels of certainty and judgment. They used blame as a tool to discharge their own fear. And they pretended that their actions did not have an effect on the people around them. When Brown looked at these two lists, from the data she gathered, she realized that she fell squarely on the second list. She had sought perfection in her family, in her life, and in her work. She had even gotten into research in the first place as a way to manage and control vulnerability. In her words, to beat it back with her measuring stick. And all of that measuring, all of that data was telling her that her way of living was more likely to separate her from other people and from happiness. So instead of going back into the data, Brown went into therapy to explore how to become more vulnerable in her own life. In her book, The Art of Gathering, Priya Parker writes about how authenticity enables group trust and group depth. She argues that how a gathering of human beings is designed determines how much an individual will be able to show up authentically in that gathering. In one story in the book, Parker writes about her experience at the Harvard Kennedy Graduate School, where the modus operandi was a smiling perfectionism. People were constantly trying to impress, outsmart, and one-up one another, rolling out their accomplishments and polished arguments. Parker wrote that one of her graduate classmates, Lisa Lazarus, quote, had the gall to suggest that this was a lonely, miserable way to learn. Lazarus took it upon herself to create a small group reflection circle that she called Change Agents Now, in which she would gather 6 Kennedy School students who would agree to meet with one another every other week for 3 hours and be real. She modeled these circles on author and Harvard Business School professor Bill George's concept of crucible moments, difficult, challenging moments that shape who we are as people and transform the way that we understand the world. Instead of pretending that everything was perfect and totally easy, Lazarus invited her classmates to gather together and talk about a time that they had struggled and how that struggle had changed who they were as a person. she deliberately invited authenticity through the doorway of vulnerability. Parker signed up for one of these small groups, and she said that it changed her experience of graduate school. The school became kind of a different place for me, Parker wrote. Armor fell off, ears widened, and mouths shrank. We learned to love one another for our flaws. The naval officer whose father was once homeless, the entrepreneur who grew up poor, the executive director who, in light of an absent father, became a second parent to her siblings. And rather than feel jealous or intimidated by their accomplishments, I began to feel empathy for them because I understood their stories as they understood mine. As a result of her experience in the small group, Parker began to take risks in vulnerability outside of the group. She was building up her vulnerability and courage muscle through practicing taking risks and witnessing other people take similar risks. So what comes first? Is it the careful design and shared practice of deep listening and community that builds the trust that enables vulnerability from an individual? Or is it an individual's practice of letting themselves be vulnerable that then drops the anchor deeper in community and creates more space for other people to share their own vulnerability? A lemniscate is a geometry term for a plane curve that meets in the center. When graphing a lemniscate, like you do, the curves mirror each other as they go out from the center and flip around and come back in and meet in the middle in a figure 8. Some people call these figure 8 lemniscates the devil's curve because of its similarity to a juggling game called Diabolo. The chicken or egg game of vulnerability is similar to the devil's curve, as each effort to go deeper individually or to create the bonds of trust in community reaches out towards connection and then loops back in, reinforcing the growth of the other side of the curve. Brown's research showed that in order for people to feel worthy and have a strong sense of belonging in a group, they must risk vulnerability and let themselves be truly and authentically seen. Parker's work showed that in order for individuals to take the risk of being vulnerable, groups have to set themselves up to hold and gather people's real stories. Each time an individual stretches the courage muscle and risks vulnerability, it creates more safety and trust in the group. And each time a group sets themselves up to make space for authentic stories and prepare themselves to witness each other, more space is made for individuals to reach down and get vulnerable. This vulnerability dance is the divinity in the devil's curve. In my class in seminary, I knew that I didn't feel comfortable opening up in a space where one of my classmates was sitting in a place of judgment. My teacher, however, knew that my classmate was judging herself most harshly and first. And all her outward projections of blame were coming from a place of an inner struggle with worthiness. So instead of trying to correct her, he reassured her again and again that she was loved and she was worthy. He had us show up and witness her imperfections and respond to them with acceptance. And he gave her the tools to investigate and develop her own sense of worthiness through self-reflection. In the 3 months of that class, I watched this woman slowly change her mind about herself. She moved from self-judgment to self-compassion, slowly accepting her imperfections and opening up to vulnerability. Eventually, she was able to tell us that her judgment was coming from deep-seated insecurities about her own worth. In the process of being held and witnessed in that fear, and from doing her own work, showing up for that fear and reflecting on it, she blossomed. It was gorgeous to watch. Her shoulders dropped and she stood up straighter. She started smiling and then she started laughing regularly. And the way that she showed up with us changed as well. She cared about us, and she was able to show up for us and witness us in compassion. This was not easy work. There were tears and fear, and she worked really hard to get there. But at the end of those 3 months, this woman came to the conclusion that she was worthy of connection and belonging. And she found it. She found it with us. She found a sense of community, and she even found love. After spending years of her life alone, that year she met someone. She fell in love and she got married the following year. She was happy and kind and had finally found her sense of belonging in that 8-shaped divinity between a group that could hold her vulnerability and her own acceptance of her imperfections. My dear ones, may you too find your own worthiness. May you know that you do not have to be perfect to be loved. And may you find a place here that can hold your authentic vulnerability. May you slip into that track between self-compassions and the bonds of trust waiting to witness you and find belonging. May it be so. Will you please rise in body or spirit for a responsive reading? This is adapted from an interview with Paulo Coelho in On Being. I'll begin. Love is a magic bridge that allows us to cross from the visible world. I am talking to you and you can hear my voice. Emotions are something that we can't see, we can't touch. The most important one being love. You cannot make people understand love with their minds alone. You are a manifestation of love. If you know this, you will learn to trust other people. From the moment I was not scared of manifesting my love, and will you join us in singing our closing hymn, number 18, What Wondrous Love Is This?